Hello, welcome back to Attacking with Isolated Pawn Part 2. So, in this video we're going to be looking at different structure when white has a pawn on d4 and black on c6. We will see great games and great ideas with h4, h5 attack, typical and combined attack, and that the bishop on b3 is very good and the f7 pawn is very weak. So, let's start with the first example, the game of Vaganian-Hübner. I like this game very much. Now we can see that the knight on d7 is not really good, and that I mentioned before that the d4 pawn controls the c5 and e5 squares. We can see now that the knight is completely cut. And the bishop on b3 is good, keeping an eye on f7. The queen on f3 keeps an eye on f7, and the rook is already on third rank. But how to develop the attack? What can white do? White played here a great move, h4, disturbing this knight on g6, which is actually out of play, but gaining the space on king side as well. But why not knight h4? What is the trick? After queen h5, white attacks the knight on h4, so its only place is to go to g6, and now we see that the rook on f8 is somehow bothering black because f8 square is not free. So white uses this chance, and after rook h3, white attacks the h7 pawn. So there is no knight f8 to go, and the only move is to play h6, not to get mated, and queen g6. The pawn on f7 is pinned, and black cannot take on g6, so it is completely winning for white because he won the piece. So, h4 pawn is poisoned pawn. Black decided to play h6 and queen g4. Still the same idea, to take on g6 because the pawn on f7 is pinned. King h8, h5. Knight f4 was played. Well, knight f4 is pretty active move. Wants to go either on d5 just to close this diagonal, because knight on e7 actually would be very, very passive after rook g3. Simply, there is no defense, and rook g8 doesn't help because the f7 pawn is hanging. So let's see what happened in the game. h5, knight f4, knight f4, and rook g3. So now the threat is on g7. And what can black do? How can he defend the g7? It's very difficult. Hübner wants g5, hg5, fg5, but now we see that the king on h8 is completely open, and white has a bishop. And look at the pawns, they are very weak. Rook e8, a very strong move, bringing the rook on open file, after the knight moves. So rook d8. Now rook ge3. White does not need the rook on g3, so rook g3 transfer is very clever idea, because mostly what white needs here is the e file. Knight b6, Black tries to cover the d5 square, but after knight c5, queen c8. Well, rook e3, just f takes e3, and white has a great center. So queen c8. Queen c8 was a big blunder actually, because Vaganian played a very nice queen f4 and won the game. We can see that rook f4 doesn't work because of rook e8, and white is completely winning. So let's see another example. Now black managed to have the knight on d5, and the knight on d5 attacks the rook on c3. But we can see that the queen is very good, and the rook is already on third file, so it can transfer and be in the attack very quickly. And the queen has an eye on h7. So, bishop d5. Of course, exchanges are mostly in black's favor, but here white has a concrete play with concrete attack. Queen d5 and rook e5. So we see that all of these moves are with tempo. Queen a2 is a trick actually, because after rook a3 it turns out to be a trap and a trick as well. So queen d6, knight g5. Again, the move with the tempo, attacking the h7 pawn. So if queen g6, just queen b3, and well, maybe it was better to play this queen g6 rather than it was in the game, because after h6, knight e4, but this knight is still better than the bishop on c8. It's still busy defending the b7 pawn, and the knight can jump to dark and white squares. So, I mean dark squares here, but after g6, rook f3. Well, white leaves the pawn on d4, but of course it's poisoned after queen d4, rook e4, queen d5, knight f7. We have still the same typical sacrifices on f7. After rook f7, rook e8. Rook f8 is not possible, so king g7 is the only move. Queen c3. Now black has only one move. King h6, queen e3, king g7, and rook f7. King f7 is not good because of mate on e7, so after queen f7, rook e7, white wins the queen. Rook f3, but what happens if bishop f5? Bishop comes with tempo, attacking the c2 queen and covering the f file. But of course, these type of bishops should be taken when the knight is on g5 already and the king on king's side is really weak and really open. So gf5, rook g3 with several threats, king h8, queen f5, mate on h7, so queen g6, queen f4, well, many threats opening, the knight jumps, so f5 was very, okay, I mean, it's a line, but f5 is not good due to knight h7, and if queen h7, then queen e5, there is a mate. after queen g7, queen g7. So, rook f3, and this was the game of Putin and Balashov, and Balashov decided to play f6, double attack on rook and the knight, so why not? But the diagonal a2 g8 is weak and the king is still on g8, so after queen b3, king g7, white has a great move, rook e8, escaping from double attack and using the chance that the queen f7, the knight is on g5 and the threat is queen f7 after rook e8. There is, well, knight king h8 is a mate on h7, and if king h6, then queen h7, king g5, h4, king g4, take here, king h4, rook h3, bishop h3, g3, queen g3, f g3. Very beautiful mate. So, rook e8 also, using the fact that the rook is on f8 and fg5 is not possible because of rook f8, so black decided to play a5. Well, being out of moves, black played a5, and again, a nice tactic, rook c8. Well, a5's idea is a4, of course, so rook c8, white kills the bishop on c8, which was defending the b7 pawn, and after rook a c8, queen b7, rook c7, doesn't help, queen c7, knight e6, double attack, white wins the queen back and is piece up. A very nice win from Putian. Let's go to next game, and here we have another example of the great game Karpov-Yusupov. So, the rook is on c3 again, and it should be free. The third rank should be free. A natural knight e5 move keeps an eye on f7. So Yusupov decided to cover the diagonal with knight d5, rook g3. Yet nothing is happening. I mean, no direct threats. So Yusupov decided to develop. Bishop f5. Queen h5 attacks the bishop. Bishop h7 and queen g4. Now we see that there is a big threat on g7. Here, queen f6 is not possible because of bishop d5, c d5 and knight d7. Well, bishop d5 is not needed, but it's nicer to exchange the pieces and win the exchange. So after queen g4, Yusupov played g5. g6 is possible, but look at this bishop on h7. It's completely dead, so it's not very nice to play, and h4 comes anyway, so black is really hopeless. So after g5, h4, f6, the only move to defend the g5 pawn, hg5, hg5, and f4, again attacking the g5 pawn. Now we see that the g5 pawn is pinned and the d5 knight is also pinned. So, what to do? King h8 doesn't help because of f takes g5, and if black takes on e5, There is g6 with terrible threat g7. Queen g6, rook, bishop g6, rook g6, ed, rook e4, with mating threat on h4. So, f4, rook a e8 was played in the game. F takes g5, f takes e5. g6, still the same. Bishop g6, d e5. Well, rook e5 is not because of rook e5, and g6 bishop is hanging. So after queen e6, white took on d5, cd5, changed on g6, and after king h7, rook d6, after rook d5, white has several pawns, extra pawns. A very good and convincing win by Karpov. And let's see our last example, Razuvayev Bagirov. Again, there are a lot of pieces on the board, so natural is, of course, knight e5. Now, black decided to exchange the pieces, which of course we know that in general moments is in black's favor. So after knight c7, well, queen a5 was another possibility, but okay, there is a move. Queen d2, and white just develops. So knight e5, knight c7, bishop c2. White brings the bishop on b1 h7 diagonal with the idea of bishop and queen battery. Rook e8, queen d3, g6, queen f3. Now this pawn on d4 is again poisoned because of bishop f6. So knight fd5, bishop e7, queen e7, and queen g3. Well, there might be something happening on this pawn chain. Rook a d8, rook a d1, normal development, and knight f6. Black somehow does not like this queen on g3 and wants to kick it from g3. So after f4, typical attacking idea, with f5, knight h5, queen f2, and black decided to play f5 himself. Because, okay, allowing f5 would be just disaster. g4. White continues to attack. Knight g7, gf5, gf5, king h2. Now there is the g file, and the knight on e5 has a very good permanent square. After king h8, rook g1, bishop d5, knight d5, cd5, and white found a great idea here, rook g6, using the fact that hg6 is not possible because of knight g6 and double attack. So knight ce6, doubling the rooks on g-file, rook f8, rook h6, h7 pawn, knight g6 is the threat, king g8, and now it's time to bring the bishop back on a2, g8 diagonal, as the king is on g8 and the d5 pawn will be weak. So rook d6, queen g2, keeping an eye on d5 and on g7 knight. Rook fd8, bishop d5, rook d5, rook e6. We see a terrible pin on g file, so queen e6 is not possible because of mate on g7, queen f8, and another great move played by Razovaev. We see that the queen on g2 attacks the d5, and the pieces are actually overloaded, defending each other. So rook e8. Knight e8 is not possible. Queen e8 is not possible because of mate. And after rook e8, queen d5, black just resigned because this one doesn't help. Knight f7, queen f7. Okay, white is just queen up, and if king g8, white has a lot of threats. He can jump here, knight d6 with open check and win a lot of material. So I hope you enjoyed my examples and hope you learned something. See you in next video.